Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a topic that has puzzled dreamers, thinkers, and physicists alike: the gentle mystery of how a time traveller might move through the past without disturbing the delicate weave of cause and effect. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the quiet heart of time travel paradoxes together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. There is something wonderfully soothing about imagining time as a long, unbroken ribbon, stretching behind us into memories and ahead of us into hopes. It seems so simple from a distance, like a smooth line drawn across a page. Yet, when you lean closer, the simplicity softens. You begin to notice folds, small curvatures, the way moments brush up against one another. Time becomes less like a straight road and more like a fabric, woven with gentle irregularities, small knots, and subtle shifts in texture. It is within those small folds that the most intriguing questions hide, quietly waiting for someone curious enough to notice them. One of those questions, the one that calls many late-night thinkers to pause, asks a simple thing. If we could walk back along this ribbon, if we could retrace our steps through the past, how would the ribbon hold its shape? Would it stay smooth beneath our feet, or would it curl up, twist and tear as we pressed against it from the wrong direction? The question may appear grand and dramatic, but beneath it lies something intimate: the nature of cause and effect, and our place within that fragile sequence. Most people encounter time as a dependable rhythm that carries them forward. Morning arrives, the sun lifts itself over the horizon, and the day follows in a quiet procession. But when we speak of travelling backward, when we imagine a traveller slipping from the present into the echo of yesterday, the dependable rhythm stutters. What happens if you arrive in a moment that once shaped you? What happens if your presence reshapes events that once led to your existence? These gentle contradictions give rise to paradoxes, the little knots in the ribbon. Yet paradoxes, though often presented dramatically, need not be frightening. They aren't sharp edges waiting to cut us. They're more like playful riddles presented by the universe, inviting us to slow down and observe the subtle ways in which reality holds itself together. Just as a whisper can reveal more in silence than a shout can in noise, paradoxes reveal the quiet logic that keeps the world coherent. Consider for a moment the simple act of remembering where you placed your keys. You retrace your steps, walking backward through the morning in your mind, past the table, past the door, past the moment you reached into your pocket. In a sense, you're performing a tiny internal time travel, touching earlier points in your personal timeline. Nothing tears, nothing unravels. The memory sits there, waiting for you, unchanged. This tiny analogy, simple as it is, shows that going back doesn't have to disturb the story. It only becomes complicated when your actions begin to rewrite the sequence, instead of quietly revisiting it. Time travel paradoxes arise when cause and effect circle around each other, when the effect begins to influence its own cause in a way that seems impossible. But long before we attempt to explain the technical language behind such loops, it's enough to appreciate their flavour. Imagine dropping a pebble into a pond, ripples spread outward in perfect circles. Now imagine that one ripple curls back toward the pebble's origin, gently trying to erase the fact that the pebble ever fell. The image feels strange, almost dreamlike. Ripples are not meant to travel backward. Yet in certain corners of physics, the possibility of backward-moving ripples is not dismissed outright. Instead, it is treated with a kind of careful respect. If a chrononaut, a traveller of time, were to step into such a ripple, their journey might feel surprisingly soft. No thunderous light, no roaring engines, perhaps just a subtle shift, like stepping from a warm room into a cooler one, or like hearing a distant echo that wasn't there a moment ago. The world might feel familiar and unfamiliar at once, and somewhere within that subtle shift, they would carry a question. How does one move through a memory without disturbing it? To ease into the topic, it helps to imagine the past not as a rigid stone carving, but as a delicate photograph, one that can withstand being looked at, studied, even approached, but not roughly altered. If you step lightly, the photograph remains intact. If you try to scrape or rewrite parts of it, the image may blur, resisting your attempt to change its content. Theoretical physics often expresses these ideas in symbolic language, but for our quiet exploration tonight, we will let the symbols rest. Instead, we will think in images, photographs, ripples, ribbons, doorways, and soft shadows cast by events long gone. And as we settle into the idea, another thought rises gently beside it. The universe, in all its complexity, may already have built-in ways to protect itself from contradiction. Whether through the subtle geometry of space, the quiet rules of quantum, behaviour, or deeper principles we have yet to name, time may have its own kind of resilience. A traveller might move through it, but the path behind them adjusts, responding like fabric reshaping under a careful hand. These early reflections prepare us for the journey ahead. Before we can untangle paradoxes, we first need to feel what it means for time to have texture, shape, and sensitivity. When we grasp that the past is not merely before, but a place within a carefully balanced story, every paradox becomes an opportunity to admire the silent craftsmanship of reality. And now that this first impression has settled, we find ourselves gently drifting toward the heart of a paradox that has haunted countless stories, the one where a traveller meets the roots of their own existence. There is a moment, familiar to almost anyone who has wandered through stories of time travel, when the mind pauses at a single, quietly unsettling question. It feels simple at first, almost playful. What would happen if you went back in time and prevented your own existence? The question is usually wrapped in dramatic storytelling, but beneath all the theatrics lies a soft, persistent riddle. It lingers not because it is frightening, but because it touches the very edge of how we understand ourselves. This puzzle is often called the grandfather paradox. Despite its grand name, the heart of the paradox is intimate, almost painfully human. It imagines a traveller stepping into the past long before they were born, into a moment when their grandparents or parents or some quiet ancestor went about their day unaware that the future was drifting toward them. And then, for reasons that vary from tale to tale, the traveller takes an action that would prevent their own lineage from unfolding. If their ancestor does not live, the traveller is never born, and if the traveller is never born, how did they travel back in the first place? This circular knot captures the imagination not because of its violence or drama, but because of its simple disruption to the flow of cause and effect. Imagine reading a book where, in Chapter 1, a character sets out on a journey. In Chapter 5, that same character travels back to erase the opening scene. Suddenly the story no longer has a beginning. Chapter 1 dissolves into nothing, leaving the rest of the book floating without foundation. The paradox feels almost like a trick of the eye, like noticing a reflection where no mirror should be. Yet the paradox also reveals something tender about our relationship with time. We assume, often without thinking, that our lives form a single, unbroken line, one moment giving rise to the next in a steady procession. The grandfather paradox does not challenge physics alone. It challenges our sense of identity. It asks, if the past changes, Does the person who remembers the change also change? And if their memory changes, do they remain the same person at all? These questions can feel heavy when stated bluntly, but there is a gentler way to approach them. Instead of imagining a traveller setting out with the intention of harming their lineage, imagine something smaller, quieter. Picture a traveller arriving in a past where their own presence is already a delicate disturbance. Perhaps they drop a glove. Perhaps they move a chair. Perhaps they speak to someone who was never meant to remember their voice. Seemingly harmless actions become threads tugged from a tapestry. Even a tiny change ripples outward, just as a single tug on a loose thread can eventually reshape the entire pattern. And yet, reality does not seem to allow these unravelings easily. There is a quiet resistance woven into the fabric of time. Many physicists describe it as a form of protection, an unconscious tendency of events to bend toward consistency. But before we ever speak of principles or theories, we can feel this resistance intuitively. Life itself often finds ways to maintain its continuity. Memories shift, expectations bend, paths stray and return, but the flow of time remains steady. If the grandfather paradox seems impossible, it is because it touches a boundary the universe rarely lets us cross. It imagines cause reaching backward to unmake itself. And while that is a beautiful idea for stories, it sits at the edge of what feels natural. Even in thought experiments, the paradox behaves like a loop that refuses to close cleanly. A traveller who erases themselves would also erase the act of erasure. The moment collapses into a kind of logical mist, a place where before and after lose their meaning. But paradoxes are not roadblocks. They are more like lanterns. They illuminate the areas where our understanding is thin. They show us where the rules of time become delicate, where intuition falters and deeper structures start to appear. The grandfather paradox, more than any other, invites us to reconsider the story of time not as a simple line, but as something more complex and elastic. To make this gentler, imagine a small wooden bridge stretching over a quiet stream. The bridge represents the timeline, sturdy, simple, dependable. Now imagine someone trying to remove one of the support beams while standing on the bridge itself. As soon as the beam loosens, the bridge begins to shift beneath their feet. If it loosens completely, the person would fall, and the attempt to remove the beam could not have happened. The whole scenario wavers, trembling between possibilities that cannot both be true. Physicists often use diagrammatic tools to express these contradictions, sometimes drawing circular arrows or branching lines. But for our peaceful journey tonight, we let those symbols rest. It is enough to imagine the bridge and the trembling beam, enough to feel the instability of cause trying to unmake itself. What fascinates researchers is not the paradox's dramatic flair, but the idea that the universe may have built-in protections against situations like these. Perhaps the bridge cannot be dismantled from within. Perhaps the wood strengthens the moment it senses strain. Or perhaps, more poetically, the traveller never quite manages to loosen the beam. Something interrupts them, distracts them, or nudges their hand. A gust of wind, a sudden memory, a stone slipping underfoot. The smallest moment can correct the path and restore coherence. Stories often portray the grandfather paradox as a test of logic, but in reality it is a test of consistency. It reminds us that time is not just a sequence of moments, it is a structure, almost architectural in its integrity. And if a traveller moves through it, the structure may shift slightly, the way wood creaks under weight, but it will not collapse. It holds itself together with a depth more subtle than our everyday thoughts can grasp. As we let these reflections settle, the paradox becomes less of a threat and more of a guidepost. It shows us where the boundaries lie. It helps us sense the edges of a system that, though vast, is not chaotic. And from this foundation, the recognition that certain contradictions cannot coexist, we can begin exploring the elegant solutions the universe may already have prepared. Some solutions are rooted in the geometry of spacetime itself, others in the quiet rules of quantum behavior, and still others in the possibility that there is not just one timeline but many. But all of them begin with this simple realization: paradoxes arise only when we try to force reality into shapes it does not wish to take. When we listen to the shape it already has, the contradictions soften and a new clarity appears. And with that clarity, we gently drift toward the next curiosity waiting in the background. The idea that the very structure of space-time may curve in ways that allow loops, turns, and returns. There are moments in physics when a simple drawing on paper, a looping arrow, a curved line bending back toward its beginning, reveals something far more astonishing than the lines themselves. These sketches represent ideas once thought impossible, paths through space-time that circle around, returning to the very moment they started. Physicists call these paths closed time-like curves, but the name is far heavier than the experience they suggest. For our quiet exploration tonight, we can imagine them instead as roads that choose not to stretch endlessly forward, but to fold gently backward, forming a loop. To sense what this means, picture walking along a forest trail just before dusk. The ground is soft beneath your feet, and the air carries the faint scent of pine. As you move, the light dims, and you expect the trail to open into a clearing, but instead, without your noticing, the path bends and curves, eventually bringing you back to the very place where you began. There is something both familiar and disorienting about this return. You recognize the spot, yet your memory insists you should be somewhere else. This feeling, soft and surreal, echoes the essence of a road that leads back in time. Closed time-like curves arise not from imagination alone, but from the deep, flexible geometry of Einstein's theory of space-time. The theory describes space and time as a kind of fabric, stretchable, twistable, responsive to mass and motion. Most of the time, this fabric behaves in ways we expect. It flows forward, moment by moment. But under certain extraordinary conditions, the fabric can twist so dramatically that a path through it loops backward, allowing an object, or even a person, to return to an earlier moment. One of the simplest examples comes from imagining a universe that spins. If the entire cosmos rotated in a very particular way, space-time would curl with it. This curl could be strong enough to bend the usual forward march of time into a spiral. The equations behind this idea are intricate, but we will let them rest. For tonight, the image is enough. A swirling universe pulling moments into circular motion, like leaves caught in a gentle vortex of wind. Another example arises from something more familiar to science fiction lovers: immense rotating objects. If a cylinder, longer than anything we can conceive of and spinning almost unimaginably fast, existed somewhere in the depths of space, the space-time around it might twist into loops. These loops would not be violent or chaotic. Instead, they would resemble slow, graceful spirals, paths that drift back toward earlier times the way a whirlpool can pull a leaf back toward its centre. Yet perhaps the most captivating example comes from rotating black holes. These cosmic giants with their swirling edges and deep gravitational wells carry within their mathematical descriptions the possibility of circular time. Near the heart of such an object, far beyond where any traveller could safely reach, space-time folds into shapes that defy everyday intuition. The idea is not that these regions are practical gateways, but rather that they reveal the richness of what space-time can be. When the math of the universe is allowed to stretch to its limits, it whispers, time does not always need to move in a straight line. For our peaceful exploration, we can imagine these possibilities not as literal destinations, but as concepts gently illuminating the edges of what might be possible. Closed time-like curves, despite their formidable name, tell us something subtle. Time is not rigid. It can bend, curve, and return. it has texture and shape, and sometimes those shapes allow for loops. Of course, in reality, walking such a loop would be far from simple. Physicists speak of turbulent regions, intense gravitational forces and unstable geometries, features that would make these loops nearly impossible to traverse safely. But we can soften these details by thinking of them as warnings on a map. A trail may exist on paper, showing a circular route through a forest, but if the trail winds too close to cliffs or marshes, it becomes a path for birds and breezes, not for travellers. What matters for us, gently drifting through these thoughts before sleep, is not the engineering challenge of building a time loop, but the conceptual revelation it brings. The existence of these loops in theory means that time, under the right conditions, can fold back upon itself. This fold is the foundation of almost every paradox we've spoken of. It is the geometry that allows a traveller to revisit moments that once seemed locked behind them, and yet it also holds hints of the solutions to those paradoxes. For if time can loop, perhaps it also knows how to preserve its own consistency within that loop. Imagine a circle drawn on a quiet pond. The water within it ripples, reflections shift, but the boundary remains steady. Anyone drifting along the circle would eventually return to their starting point, having experienced many small motions along the way, but never escaping the loop. A closed time-like curve behaves in much the same way. It invites motion, but it also imposes structure. It allows change, but only change that fits within its shape. This is why closed time-like curves lead naturally into discussions of self-consistency, multiverse branching, and quantum corrections, all concepts we will explore gently in the sessions ahead. For now, it is enough to appreciate that time, like a winding trail or a circular path across water, has the potential to turn back toward itself. This potential helps explain why paradoxes arise, and why, with a bit of deeper understanding, they may not be paradoxes at all but simply misunderstandings of how the universe holds its own shape. As this thought settles, you might feel a soft shift in perspective, as though the straight line of past, present and future has grown just a little more flexible, a little more curved at the edges. And from this new vantage point, another idea begins to appear softly on the horizon. The possibility that doorways through time might exist not only through loops, but through tunnels that fold distant moments together like pages brought face to face. When people imagine travelling through time, their thoughts often drift towards something that feels more like a doorway than a looping path. A place you could step into, feeling a gentle shift in the air, and step out again into a moment far removed from the one you left behind. This idea, both elegant and dreamlike, is tied to the concept of wormholes. They are not simple tunnels carved into space, but rather foldings of the fabric itself, like pulling together two distant points of a blanket until they touch. To picture a wormhole, imagine setting a heavy book on your lap. The cover is cool beneath your fingertips, the pages thick with printed stories. Now imagine bending one corner of the book so that page 50 brushes softly against page 200. Normally you would have to flip through all the pages in between to travel from one chapter to another, but by folding the book, you place those distant scenes side by side. A wormhole promises something similar, a way to bring moments or places that are far apart into gentle proximity. The scientific description of a wormhole is intricate, often written in symbols and equations that seem to flutter like wings across chalkboards. But the essence is not difficult to feel. Space and time, in Einstein's picture of the universe, behave like a flexible sheet. Mass can stretch it, energy can ripple it, and under extraordinary conditions this sheet might fold so dramatically that two distant points meet. Where they touch, an opening forms, a throat, narrow and curved, connecting the separated regions. Some imagine stepping through such a throat as if entering a quiet tunnel, carved into the cosmos. But it is less like passing through a physical passage, and more like moving through a place where distance loses its meaning. One moment you're standing in a familiar room, light flickering softly on the walls. The next moment you emerge into a different time, as though the universe has allowed you to skip the long journey that normally separates the two. But wormholes do not come without complications. To hold the throat open, to keep it from collapsing under its own weight, the universe seems to require something unusual. Physicists call it exotic matter, but the word exotic suggests something far stranger than necessary. For our quiet journey, think of it simply as a kind of pressure that pushes outward instead of inward, like a support frame made from something that behaves differently from anything you could touch. It is as though the tunnel walls want to fall closed, but this unusual form of energy presses them open, keeping the passage stable long enough for a traveller to drift through. This outward pushing energy sounds dramatic, but we can soften it with an image. Picture a delicate soap bubble stretched between two fingers. If you press too hard, it collapses. But if the pressure is just right, gentle, steady, balanced, the bubble remains a perfect shimmering sphere, a fragile doorway holding itself open. A wormhole's stability is like that balance, a careful interplay of forces that must be maintained with extraordinary precision. There is also the question of time. Although wormholes begin as shortcuts through space, they can become doorways through time as well. If one end of the wormhole experiences time differently from the other, perhaps by moving at high speed or resting in a stronger gravitational field, the two openings can fall out of sync. One end might age more slowly, like a clock that ticks at a gentler pace, and when the two ends reconnect, the difference between them becomes a kind of temporal offset. Walking through the wormhole, you might emerge in a moment that does not belong to the same rhythm as the one you left. This temporal shift does not require complicated formulas to understand. It is similar to two clocks kept in different rooms, one in a quiet hallway, the other beside a vibrating window. If you compare them later, you may find they disagree, even though both are honest in their own way. A wormhole takes this disagreement and turns it into possibility. One opening becomes a door into an earlier time, the other becomes a door into the future. For a chrononaut, this gentle misalignment is the heart of the magic. It means that wormholes, under the right conditions, could serve as the closest thing to a classical time machine. But even here, the universe remains careful. These structures, while mathematically allowed, may be too delicate to survive the real world. The slightest disruption, like the soap bubble trembling in a breeze, could make the passage collapse. Some physicists have suggested that quantum fluctuations, the tiniest vibrations of energy in empty space, would swell near a wormhole throat, causing it to snap shut before anything macroscopic could pass through. These warnings, however, do not diminish the beauty of the idea. They remind us that wormholes, whether real or symbolic, teach us something profound about the shape of time. They show that the universe is not a simple map of roads stretching endlessly outward, but a place where distance and duration can bend. They show that shortcuts exist in theory, even if not in practice. And they reveal that time travel, at least on paper, is not merely a violation of the natural order, but a possibility woven into the mathematical rhythms of space-time. To imagine standing before a wormhole is to imagine standing before a moment where the rules loosen. The air might feel different, charged with a kind of expectant stillness. The edge of the opening could shimmer faintly, not with light, but with the sense that the normal flow of moments has been rearranged. Stepping through would not feel like rushing or falling. It would feel like drifting between two pages of a book that have been gently pressed together. As this thought settles, the concept of wormholes becomes less like a machine and more like an invitation to consider the possibility that time has far more pathways than we usually see. And as that invitation lingers, another idea quietly rises beside it, the sense that even if these doorways exist, the universe may have its own way of ensuring they do not create contradictions. There is a quiet kind of comfort in the idea that the universe, despite all its mysteries and wild possibilities, may have a way of keeping itself safe. Just as a river knows how to hold its banks during a gentle rain, or a tree knows how to turn its leaves toward the sun, space-time may have a built-in instinct that prevents certain contradictions from ever forming. This gentle instinct is often described through something known as the chronology protection idea, Stephen Hawking's proposal that the universe in its own subtle way discourages the formation of paths that travel backward through time. To understand this softly, imagine a house with many rooms. Most rooms are comfortable and familiar, places where people move freely, but some rooms have fragile floors or delicate decorations, spaces where one instinctively steps lightly, sensing that careless movement could cause harm. Time, it seems, has rooms like this. Some regions are sturdy and stable, others, the ones where backward loops could form, are delicate. In these delicate regions, the universe becomes cautious, as if warning travellers not to step too heavily. Hawking's idea begins with a simple observation. Whenever physicists try to construct a time machine using the known rules of space-time, something strange happens near the moment the time machine is almost ready to work. Not a loud explosion or a dramatic collapse, but something quieter and more pervasive. Tiny fluctuations of energy begin to rise. The fluctuations are so small that they are usually invisible, like the faint rustlings of wind through tall grass. But near the opening of a time loop, these gentle tremors start to grow. They rise and gather like ripples building into a small wave. In the language of physics, these ripples are described as quantum fluctuations, the soft background hum of energy that exists even in complete darkness. When a potential time machine approaches functionality, these fluctuations behave as though they sense the coming contradiction. They swell, increasing in intensity, as if trying to warn the universe. Something dangerous is beginning to form, and if the swelling continues unchecked, the structure needed to create the loop becomes unstable. Supports fail. Tunnels collapse. The doorway folds back into the original fabric, leaving no route for a traveller to slip through. But we don't need intricate formulas to feel the meaning of this. Imagine blowing a bubble with a thin film of soap. The bubble glistens, perfect and fragile. But if the air around it trembles too much, if the breeze becomes too strong, the bubble tightens, flickers, and finally pops, unable to hold its delicate surface together. A wormhole or time loop near its critical moment feels like that bubble, beautiful, fragile, but deeply sensitive to disturbances. In a way, Hawking's idea suggests the universe pops the bubble before a paradox can form. This is not an act of violence or punishment, it's a natural response, like a soft correction maintaining balance. The universe simply prefers consistency, the way a river prefers the smoothest path downhill. If a contradiction is about to arise, a loop where cause and effect challenge each other, the fabric of space-time begins to quiver, making the loop impossible to complete. Some people imagine this cosmic safety net as a kind of guardian, something vigilant that watches over the timeline. But it is more subtle than that. It's not a conscious presence, nor a set of rules written down somewhere. It's simply the nature of the universe expressing itself. Just as air expands when heated and water flows downhill, space-time seems to resist the formation of loops that would create paradoxes. It is a quiet property, a tendency, not a decree. This idea, even softened into gentle imagery, carries a kind of reassurance. It suggests that when we imagine time machines slipping into the past, we need not worry that the universe will crumble under the contradiction. Instead, the pathways that lead to paradox simply refuse to stay open. The closer we get to creating one, the more the universe stirs and reshapes itself, turning would-be loops into harmless fluctuations. This instinct, if we choose to call it that, has another implication. It tells us that time travel into the future remains perfectly safe. When a traveller moves at great speed or falls deep into a gravitational well, their personal time slows, letting them leap ahead without disturbing the continuity of events. The river of time flows forward, and they simply drift through it at a different pace. The universe, in this case, feels no strain. There are no contradictions, no loops, no delicate rooms being disturbed. Just the gentle stretching of moments. But travelling backward, slipping into the past is another matter. This is where loops might form. This is where cause and effect could collide. And this is where the universe begins to hum with caution. Some thinkers believe that this is why we have never observed travellers from the future. Not because time travel is impossible in principle, but because backward travel is inherently unstable. The door never quite finishes forming. For the Chrononaut, the imagined traveller of our story, this means something both limiting and protective. They may wander far into the future, watching civilizations rise and fall like waves along a shoreline. They may see distant starlight evolving over eons. But when they try to return to the past, the path trembles beneath their feet. They may see a shimmer where a doorway could be, feel a shift in the air, sense a possibility lingering at the edge of existence, and then watch it dissolve like mist touched by sunlight. This dissolution is not denial. It is simply the universe choosing coherence over chaos. It is the soft hand that steadies the story. And in a way, this gentle refusal to allow backward time travel protects the Chrononaut as much as it protects the timeline. It prevents them from becoming entangled in contradictions that cannot be resolved. It allows the story of the universe to unfold with grace. And so, as we leave this idea resting in the background, a quiet understanding settles in. Time may have doorways and corridors, folds and twists, but it also has a quiet awareness of its own shape. And when one of those shapes begins to strain under the weight of contradiction, the fabric quivers and smooths, itself preserving the delicate continuity that makes every moment meaningful. There is a certain comfort in thinking that the universe, vast as it is, might possess a quiet kind of wisdom, an instinct that keeps its stories from unravelling. In the realm of time travel, this instinct takes on a gentle but powerful form. It appears in what physicists call the self-consistency principle, but for our sleepy journey tonight, we can view it simply as the universe's way of making sure its own tale unfolds without contradiction. It is not a rule written in stone, nor a law enforced by any cosmic authority. Instead, it is more like a natural tendency, the way water finds the lowest point, or a candle flame leans towards stillness when the air grows calm. To understand this idea softly, imagine a story that has already been written. Its pages may contain surprises, twists, and even mysteries, but once they are on the page, they belong to the fabric of the tale. If you enter that story, if you somehow step between the lines, you cannot simply erase a chapter or rewrite a sentence without disturbing everything that follows. Instead, the story guides you. It nudges you towards choices that fit its flow, choices that keep the narrative coherent. This is the essence of the self-consistency principle. Whatever happens in the past must fit gently into the timeline that leads to the present. In physics, the principle appears when considering closed loops in time. If a traveller follows one of these loops and re-enters the past, the loop must close in a way that makes sense. What they do in the past must not contradict the future they came from. But for our ears tonight, we do not need to speak of diagrams or equations. We can imagine it as a dance, a circular dance performed by events, each step leading naturally to the next, and eventually returning to the beginning without stumbling. A beautiful illustration of this idea comes from a simple thought experiment involving a billiard ball. Imagine a smooth table, quiet and still in the dim light of a late evening. A ball rolls across its surface, steady and calm, heading for a small arched opening, a portal that leads to the past by the tiniest sliver of time. As the ball disappears into the opening, it emerges just moments earlier, on a slightly different path. Now imagine that this returning ball nudges the original ball ever so gently, altering its direction. Not enough to stop it from entering the portal, but enough to adjust its path into the precise curve that sends the ball back to deliver that same gentle nudge. It becomes a loop, not a violent crash, not a contradiction, but a soft, circular motion. The ball nudges itself, guiding both past and future along a path that fits perfectly. There is no paradox. The universe has found the version of events that honours both cause and effect, allowing them to coexist peacefully. The dance completes itself. This image captures the heart of the Novikov idea. A chrononaut may attempt to change something dramatic in the past, but the path they walk will curve subtly, like the gentle arc of the billiard ball, toward a result that preserves consistency. Perhaps an object slips from their hand at a crucial moment. Perhaps they arrive a few seconds too late. Perhaps an unexpected interruption steers events in a direction they did not intend but that the universe quietly needs. It does not forbid change. It simply guides the traveller toward changes that maintain the continuity of the story. We can think of it as time having an internal elasticity. If you pull on the past too strongly, the timeline stretches and redirects your efforts, bringing things back toward the version of history that leads to the present, you know. Small changes may slip through, harmless ripples that dissipate with ease, but large paradox-creating actions encounter resistance, not like a wall, but like a gentle force that redirects your hand. You can picture this elasticity by imagining a thread stretched across a table. If you press lightly on the thread, it moves easily. But if you push hard in a way that would pull it loose or snap it, the tension pushes back. The thread holds, guiding your pressure into a curve rather than a break. The universe, under this principle, behaves much like that thread. For a chrononaut, this means that travelling into the past does not offer unlimited freedom, but it does offer a kind of safety. They may wander through earlier moments, seeing familiar events with quiet wonder. They may meet people whose actions shaped their life, feeling the strange closeness of standing within their own history. But they will not be able to shatter the foundation beneath their feet. Their efforts, even if aimed at dramatic alteration, will soften and bend until they fit within the stable loop that leads to their point of departure. In stories, time travellers often attempt to prevent tragedies or alter important moments. Yet under the self-consistency frame, such attempts lead to outcomes that are already woven into the past. A traveller might try to stop an accident, only to become part of the chain of events that causes it. They might attempt to save someone, only to hand them the very object or message that sends them down the same path. These outcomes may sound bittersweet, but they also carry a certain poetic symmetry, a reassurance that the timeline retains its coherence. It is important to realise that consistency does not erase human choice. It simply shapes the space in which choices unfold. A chrononaut stepping into the past is still a free agent, but their freedom moves within a story that has already accounted for their presence. Their footsteps were always part of the path. Their shadow was always meant to fall across that moment. And with that understanding comes a quiet sense of ease. The past does not lie open like an unwritten page waiting to be altered. It is more like a stone shaped by weather and time, solid, steady, and complete. You may walk across its surface, trace its patterns with your fingers, even leave a faint mark here or there. But its deeper structure remains intact. It holds its shape, not out of stubbornness, but out of the gentle desire to remain whole. As this thought settles, the fear of paradox begins to dissolve. Instead of worrying about contradictions or loops breaking themselves apart, we can appreciate the quiet balance that the universe seems to prefer, and from this balance emerges a deeper thought, a possibility that perhaps the past does not resist us, but guides us softly through itself, offering only the paths that allow the story to stay true. Soon, we will wander into a different idea, a universe not bound by one unchanging story but blossoming into many, where every choice may open a new room in an endless branching corridor. But for now, the gentle logic of self-consistency rests quietly like a lantern, offering a soft light as we continue our drift through the mysteries of time. There is a kind of wonder that comes from imagining not just one universe, but many, an entire landscape of possibilities stretching out like the branches of an enormous shimmering tree. Each branch holds a slightly different version of events, a different unfolding of choices, a different expression of the same cosmic story. This is the spirit of the multiverse idea, and for our quiet journey tonight, we will explore it not as a complex scientific theory, but as a soft and hopeful possibility, that every path we take and every path we do not take finds a home somewhere. When people first hear about the multiverse, they often imagine something chaotic, worlds colliding, timelines splintering, infinite versions of ourselves running across infinite realities. But the multiverse, approached gently, can feel more like a grand hall of mirrors. Each mirror reflects a slightly different version of you, standing at a slightly different angle, illuminated by slightly different light. None of the reflections are wrong or broken. They are simply variations, echoes of choices branching softly outward. In the context of time travel, the multiverse offers a very particular comfort. It suggests that if a traveller steps into the past and changes something, anything at all, they do not risk unravelling the story that led them there. Instead, they step from one branch into another, moving into a room that already exists, waiting to receive them. Their arrival does not disturb their original timeline, it simply opens a door into a new one. To feel this idea more deeply, imagine walking through an old house at dusk. The hallways are narrow, the walls worn smooth by time. Along one corridor you find a series of doors, each slightly ajar. Through one door you hear faint laughter from a memory long past. Through another, you see a moment that might have happened if you had chosen differently earlier in life, an echo of a path not taken. Each room contains a full reality, complete in its own way, with its own textures, its own shadows, its own warmth. None of these rooms replace each other. They coexist, quietly and independently, like pages of a book you have only begun to understand. For a chrononaut, this house of many rooms becomes a sanctuary. It means they can walk into the past without fear of contradiction. If they alter something significant, perhaps saving someone who once was lost, or making a choice that reshapes an entire city, the universe does not protest. It simply guides them through a doorway into the room where that choice belongs. The original timeline remains untouched, carrying on with its familiar rhythm and sequence, while the new branch unfurls around the traveller like a fresh sheet of paper, receiving the first strokes of a pen. In this view, time is not a single line, but a garden of branching paths. Each split represents a choice, a chance encounter, a possibility realised or left behind. When a time traveller steps into the past and acts differently from what history recorded, they simply choose a different path in the garden, a path that always existed in the background, waiting to be walked. This perspective softens paradoxes beautifully. In the grandfather paradox, the traveller cannot erase their own existence, not because the universe forbids it, but because the moment they take an action that contradicts their history, they have stepped into another branch where their original story does not apply. Their home timeline continues to carry the version of events that produced them, while the new branch follows the consequences of their choice. There is a kind of gentle detachment in this idea. It tells us that the past cannot be damaged, because it cannot be erased. Every change creates its own timeline. Every action finds its proper home. Even mistakes become simply alternate routes through the vastness of possibility. But the multiverse is not only about avoiding paradoxes, it also brings a subtle emotional tone, a sense of curiosity, of openness, of quiet acceptance. When viewed through this lens, the world feels less rigid. Choices matter, of course, but not in a way that binds us with fear. A wrong turn does not ruin the story. it simply begins another one. A missed opportunity may bloom somewhere else. A choice we regret in this branch may flourish beautifully in another. This perspective can be comforting, especially when imagining the life of a chrononaut. Travelling through time would require courage, not the dramatic kind, but a softer bravery, the kind that allows one to walk into unknown rooms without clinging too tightly to the old ones. The traveller would need to understand that each timeline has its own completeness, its own inner coherence, its own quiet beauty. They would step through each doorway with respect, as one might enter a sacred library filled with books written in many hands. The multiverse idea also reveals something about time itself. It suggests that the universe is not a single story desperately trying to avoid inconsistencies, but a vast collection of stories, each branching gently from the last. It is like a tree whose limbs extend outward in every direction, each holding its own leaves and watching its own seasons pass. The traveller, moving from branch to branch, does not disturb the tree. They merely explore different parts of its canopy. Some thinkers describe this branching as occurring at every moment, with every choice we make sending ripples into countless directions. But for tonight's quiet reflection, it is enough to imagine that only the branches we touch become illuminated. A chrononaut stepping into the past lights up a path that was once dark. Their presence makes the room real, not newly created but newly awakened. As we let this idea settle, a calm understanding emerges. Paradoxes lose their sharpness. The fear of altering the past softens. The traveller does not break anything, because nothing can be broken in a system that allows every possibility to flourish somewhere. What remains is a sense of spaciousness, a gentle reassurance that time in its fullness provides room for all outcomes. And with this spaciousness comes a kind of quiet wonder. If each choice opens a new room, then the universe is more generous than we often imagine. It offers not just one path, but many. Not just one outcome, but countless variations. And somewhere among them, the Chrononaut continues their journey, stepping lightly from branch to branch, exploring the vast and shimmering forest of time. There is a certain hush that comes over the mind when we turn from the wide, branching landscape of the multiverse to the subtler world of quantum ideas. The quantum realm is often described as strange, unpredictable, even chaotic, but when we approach it slowly, almost like sitting beside a quiet lake at dusk, it reveals patterns far gentler than its reputation suggests. In this soft twilight of physics, paradoxes do not stand as rigid contradictions. Instead, they melt, shifting into shapes that make sense in unexpected ways. For a chrononaut, the quantum world offers two elegant paths toward paradox-free time travel. They come from different ways of thinking, but both share the same spirit. The universe, even at its smallest scales, seems to prefer harmony over conflict. We do not need equations to understand these ideas. They are better felt as movements, little adjustments, quiet corrections, that guide events toward consistency. The first of these paths arises from a way of seeing the quantum world once described by David Deutsch. In his picture, when a traveller enters a loop in time, stepping into the past and interacting with their earlier self or with events that led to their own journey, the world gently arranges itself so that any contradictions fade away. A quantum state, which you can imagine as a soft mist holding many possibilities, settles into a form that is perfectly self-compatible. It finds a shape that does not disagree with its past or its future. To sense this idea more naturally, imagine a small pool of water disturbed by a single pebble. At first, the ripples may collide, interfere, overlap in ways that seem messy or chaotic. But give them time, and the surface begins to settle. The waves find a pattern, a rhythm, until the pool becomes calm once again. Deutsch's approach suggests that quantum states behave like this. When a paradox threatens, the ripples adjust, and the system finds a pattern that avoids contradiction. Physicists sometimes call this a fixed point, but we may think of it simply as the still point on a lake where the ripples cancel each other out. That stillness is what the universe chooses, ensuring that even if a traveller talks to their younger self or tries to alter a chain of events, the final outcome will always match what is needed to keep the loop intact. Actions taken inside the loop are not free to violate consistency. They gently curve toward the version that fits. In this sense, the Chrononaut becomes part of a quantum dance. Their choices inside the loop may feel spontaneous, but on a deeper level, the universe guides them toward the ending that preserves harmony. They become, in a way, the ripples in the water, shaped not by constraint but by the natural rhythm of the system. The second quantum path comes from a different idea, one explored by Seth Lloyd and colleagues. Instead of thinking about quantum states finding a still point, they imagine time travel as a kind of selective filtering. In this vision, the universe allows many possible outcomes to shimmer into existence, each one a potential story the traveller might write. But only the outcomes that do not create contradictions remain. The others fade away softly, the way extra echoes dissolve when you hum a single note into a quiet room. This idea is often described as post-selection, but we can think of it more simply. Picture a row of lanterns hanging in the night, each one representing a possible sequence of events. When a traveller enters a loop in time, all of these lanterns begin to glow faintly. Some glow with outcomes that fit the timeline beautifully. Others flicker with contradictions, moments where the traveller's actions would unravel the story. And then, as though guided by an unseen breeze, only the lanterns holding consistent outcomes brighten fully. The rest dim and fade, leaving behind a gentle path that the traveller naturally follows. It is not that the universe forbids them from causing paradoxes. It is simply that paradoxical outcomes cannot sustain themselves. They flicker out, leaving only the harmonious ones glowing in the darkness. Both quantum perspectives, Deutsch's settling lake and Lloyd's lantern-lit path, share a common message. Paradoxes do not destroy the story. They simply cannot survive within it. Whether through gentle adjustment or soft selection, the quantum world appears to prefer versions of events that fit together. It is almost as though time itself wants to remain readable, like a book without torn pages or tangled chapters. For a chrononaut, these ideas bring a quiet reassurance. If they find themselves inside a loop, speaking to a younger version of themselves, or interacting with events that once shaped their life, the universe will not punish them with contradictions. Instead, it will guide them, softly and invisibly, toward choices that preserve the coherence of the story. They may never even notice the guidance. A thought might occur to them at just the right moment. Their voice might falter before they say something dangerous. A small distraction may pull them away from an action that would have broken the loop. This quantum gentleness turns time travel from a dangerous paradox into a calm, self-correcting process. It becomes less like a high-wire act and more like floating downstream on a slow-moving river. The current nudges the traveller around obstacles, steering them toward the part of the river that keeps flowing smoothly. It also reveals something about the nature of rules in the universe. At the scale of stars and galaxies, time appears rigid, one moment following another, but at the quantum level, time behaves more like a soft fabric that folds, settles, and rearranges itself to avoid tearing. The self-consistent paths that emerge are not imposed from above. They arise naturally from the way the universe prefers to express itself. And so, as the chrononaut drifts through these possibilities, they may begin to sense the gentle intelligence embedded in time's structure. Paradoxes do not survive, not because they are forbidden by decree, but because they cannot coexist with the quiet harmony the universe maintains. With this understanding in place, a calm realization begins to take shape. If quantum behavior guides even the smallest ripples of existence toward consistency, then perhaps navigating the past is safer than it seems. Perhaps the universe itself helps the traveller avoid contradictions, sometimes through stillness, sometimes through subtle choice, but always through balance. And as this thought settles, a new idea drifts softly into view, that not all interactions with the past need to be grand. Some may be so gentle, so delicate, that they leave the timeline untouched, like shadows moving across a sunlit room without disturbing the dust. There is a quiet kind of comfort in knowing that not every interaction with the past carries weight. Some moments are light enough to pass through without leaving a mark, like footsteps on soft moss that spring back after each step. When we imagine a chrononaut travelling into the past, we often picture dramatic encounters, changing the outcome of a battle, rescuing someone from a tragic fate, or revealing a secret that alters the course of nations. But in truth, most interactions need not be dramatic at all. There exists a gentler category of engagement, a kind of temporal loophole, where a traveller can move like a shadow across the moments of history, observing without disturbing. To picture this, imagine stepping into an old museum late at night. The hallways are vast and dim, illuminated by only a few warm lamps. The exhibits, ancient tools, weathered manuscripts, delicate skeletons, sit behind clear glass. You can approach them, lean in close, breathe the same air they do, and trace their outlines with your eyes. But you cannot touch them. The glass protects them, and in turn, it protects the story they carry. Your presence changes nothing. The past remains intact, untouched by your gaze. This is the essence of passive time travel, moving through earlier moments without disturbing their flow. It is not a constraint, but an invitation, a reminder that simply witnessing the past offers a kind of understanding that no history book or memory could provide. Chrononauts who choose to observe rather than interfere step into a safe, quiet space where paradoxes cannot take root. Their presence is like a shadow passing over stone, visible, but not altering what lies beneath. Some theorists imagine this non-interference zone as a natural feature of spacetime. Certain periods of history, especially those far removed from delicate causal chains, may be inherently resistant to disturbance. A traveller could walk through these eras without fear. They might watch ancient farmers sow their fields, or listen to philosophers speak in crowded marketplaces, or witness the early spark of technologies that shaped the future. The events would flow around them the way a river slips around a stone, leaving the water unchanged long after their presence has passed. In this soft interpretation, even the ripples a traveller creates, footsteps, whispers, glances, are too small to shift the larger current. The timeline absorbs them effortlessly, smoothing the surface almost as soon as it is touched. Not all moments in history are fragile. Many are robust, resilient, anchored by countless tiny causes that make them steady even in the face of minor disturbances. You can imagine this resilience by picturing a sprawling tapestry. Its threads are woven so tightly that brushing your fingertips across it does nothing to alter the pattern. Time, for long stretches, is like that tapestry, strong, unyielding, indifferent to gentle contact. A traveller who understands this moves through the past with a quiet respect, knowing that as long as they act lightly, the pattern will remain unchanged. But even in moments that are more delicate, the universe may provide its own kind of cushioning. Just as a forest floor absorbs the fall of a leaf without complaint, the timeline may naturally absorb small disturbances. A chrononaut might accidentally step on a twig that snaps underfoot, or bump into someone walking by, or leave a faint impression in the dust. Yet the consequences of these small acts tend to dissipate like mist. Noise and randomness fill the gaps, smoothing over the disturbance before it grows large enough to matter. This concept often finds its way into gentle metaphors. Some describe these interactions as shadows in time, faint touches that do not anchor themselves deeply into history. Others think of them as echoes. You may hear them in the moment, but they fade quickly, leaving no lasting trace. This is how a traveller can watch the past unfold without fear of altering the path that leads to their own life. To deepen this feeling, imagine standing at the edge of a field where tall grass sways in the wind. If you walk slowly, the grass bends and then rises again as soon as you move on. The field holds no memory of your passing. The timeline in certain regions behaves much the same way. Only actions that carry significant causal weight, actions that shift the pattern of events, might leave a lasting imprint. Everything else is simply a brush of wind. For a chrononaut, the key is awareness. They learn to sense which parts of the timeline are delicate and which are sturdy. They learn to distinguish between moments that demand silence and moments where they may walk more freely. This awareness is not taught in any textbook, but learned through experience, much like walking through a quiet library and instinctively lowering your voice. Some imaginary training programs describe this as temporal empathy, a feeling for the rhythm of time, a sensitivity to the weight of certain actions. A traveller might pause before speaking, noticing the subtle tension in the air. They might hold back from touching an object, sensing its importance. They might stand still in a crowded street, letting the past flow around them until they know exactly how to move without shifting its currents. In this way, temporal loopholes become not just a technical solution to paradoxes, but also a kind of philosophy. They encourage humility, patience, and deep listening. They remind the traveller that the past is not theirs to shape, but theirs to witness. Each moment becomes a fragile treasure, preserved not by force, but by the traveller's choice to remain gentle, and yet even within this gentle approach, a quiet truth remains. The universe itself seems to support this kind of non-disruptive travel. Light footsteps leave little trace, quiet actions fade, time flows on, steady and unbroken. The chrononaut walks like a visitor wandering through a dream, present, aware, but never altering the dream's ending. As this understanding settles, another idea begins to rise softly beside it. If small interactions can be absorbed so easily, then perhaps even larger disturbances might be guided into safety by the timeline itself, nudged, corrected, redirected in ways that preserve the story's flow. And so, we drift, naturally toward the next question. What happens when the traveller's actions are not small but meaningful? How does time maintain its balance then? There is something quietly reassuring about the idea that time, even when touched or disturbed, might know how to guide itself back toward balance. Much like a river flowing around stones or a candle flame steadying itself after a passing breeze, the timeline appears to possess a natural tendency to correct small disruptions. When a chrononaut travels into the past and interacts with events more directly, stepping beyond the gentle shadows of passive observation, the universe may respond not with chaos, but with subtle adjustments that protect the continuity of the story. To sense this more clearly, imagine watching a potter at a wheel. The clay spins beneath their hands, soft and pliable, forming into a bowl or vase. If the potter's fingers slip or press unevenly, the clay wobbles. But the potter does not panic. They guide the shape back into symmetry, easing the imperfections with gentle touches. Time, in its own quiet way, behaves similarly when someone presses against it with actions that could otherwise alter its shape too sharply. This idea that the universe gently redirects potential disruptions has appeared in many discussions about paradoxes. Even actions that seem momentous at first can settle into outcomes that fit the existing timeline. A traveller might try to reveal a powerful secret to someone who's not meant to hear it, only for that person to misunderstand, forget, or be interrupted. A chrononaut might attempt to warn a city of an approaching disaster, only to find that their warning becomes a rumour, a whispered story lost in the noise of everyday life. Their intervention does not vanish, but it changes form, losing its dangerous edge and blending back into the narrative in a harmless way. These subtle redirections can be understood through small examples. Picture a falling leaf drifting toward a stream. A sudden gust of wind knocks the leaf sideways. It no longer follows the exact path it once had, but the stream still carries it along. The leaf's journey changes in detail, but not in essence. The same occurs when a time traveller's actions nudge the timeline. The details shift, fluttering lightly, but the larger flow remains unchanged. Some thinkers imagine these redirections as the universe's version of self-defense, but the tone need not feel so harsh. It is more like a gentle nudge, a quiet correction. When a chrononaut pushes too hard, the timeline responds with small events, mistimed encounters, fading memories, unexpected distractions that steer the traveller away from creating contradictions. The world does not scold them, it simply maintains its quiet equilibrium. In everyday life, we often experience moments like this, tiny coincidences that redirect our day. A bus we almost caught pulls away just before we reach the stop. A phone call interrupts us right before we say something we might regret. A misplaced object delays us long enough to avoid an unexpected storm. These are ordinary occurrences, but they hint at the way events can nudge themselves into shapes that feel inevitable. Time's self-correcting nature is not dramatic. It is a soft choreography of chance, rhythm, and gentle balancing. To bring this idea into the realm of our chrononaut, imagine them strolling through a familiar scene from years ago. The world looks younger, the air has a different scent, and conversations around them feel like echoes from a dream. The chrononaut sees someone they once knew and feels the impulse to greet them, to reveal themselves. They take a breath, step forward, and just then, a passing cart rumbles through the street, blocking the view. The moment slips by, the opportunity dissolves, and the timeline remains intact. This is how controlled interference feels, not like doors slamming shut, but like moments shifting just enough to keep the story whole. Some interpretations of time imagine this self-correction as a kind of natural averaging. If a traveller attempts an action that would drastically change events, the surrounding circumstances adjust, almost like a tapestry tightening around a pulled thread. The thread itself may move, but the overall pattern remains clear. A message might be misunderstood, a crucial object might be misplaced, a pivotal decision might be delayed until the chrononaut has already moved on. The correction is gentle, nearly invisible, but profoundly effective. We can soften this further by picturing a flock of birds moving through the sky. If one bird veers off course, the others adjust their positions, keeping the flock in harmony. The flock does not fall apart because of one deviation. It simply reshapes itself. The timeline under this gentle interpretation behaves the same way. The story bends but never breaks. This subtle guidance can even shape major events. Suppose a traveller, moved by compassion, attempts to prevent a tragedy they know is meant to occur. They might warn a friend not to take a particular journey. They might intervene in a quarrel that had once escalated. But even if their intervention momentarily shakes the timeline, the surrounding links tighten. The friend might change their mind later. The quarrel might rise again from a different spark. The tragedy, in some softened form, may still unfold, perhaps less sharply, perhaps with different details, but in a way that preserves the flow that leads to the traveller's original future. This is not a cruelty built into the universe, it is simply the consequence of coherence. The traveller cannot unmake the path that led them to time travel itself. The flow must continue. But within that requirement, there is space, soft, flexible space, for small mercies, slight improvements, gentle deviations that soothe the heart, even if they do not rewrite destiny. Some find this notion melancholy, but it can also feel comforting. It means that the timeline is resilient. It can absorb the weight of curiosity, emotion, and intention without collapsing. It means that a traveller can explore the past without the fear of ruining it. Their presence becomes another thread in the tapestry, woven in so subtly that the overall picture remains harmonious. As we let this idea settle, the air grows soft with a new understanding. The past is not fragile glass that shatters at a touch. It is a living structure that adapts and adjusts. Interference does not always break it. More often, it is soothed, folded, and balanced back into coherence by the quiet resilience of time itself. And as this sense of resilience deepens, a new question rises gently. If some actions are absorbed and others corrected, what about the paths that simply do not open at all? Are there doors in time that refuse to let the traveller through, not out of caution, but because they can only open in one direction? There is a quiet wisdom in the way certain doors in life open easily, while others remain still, as though waiting for a different season. Some doorways invite us forward with warm light, while others offer only a sense of mystery, or a gentle refusal that tells us the moment is not right. When we think of time travel, especially the kind that dips into the past, it is helpful to imagine time itself shaped by doors like these. Some open, some closed, some open only in one direction. A chrononaut wandering through the vast architecture of space-time would soon discover that not all pathways are equal. Some passages allow them to move freely toward the future, while others, tempting as they may appear, remain one-way corridors. The idea of restricted access does not mean that time is guarded by walls or patrolled by cosmic sentinels. Instead, it means that the structure of the universe naturally shapes where a traveller can go. Much like the layout of a quiet garden, guides where visitors may walk and where they must pause. To feel this idea gently, imagine visiting an old greenhouse at dawn. Sunlight filters through fogged glass panes, illuminating narrow pathways between rows of delicate plants. Some paths invite you forward with open space and soft earth beneath your feet. Others are partially blocked by hanging vines, or by small wooden signs meant not to scold, but to protect the plants from careless feet. The greenhouse is full of life, full of possibility, but it also asks for respect. Time behaves in much the same way. One of the most intriguing examples comes from the idea of time loops, curved paths in space-time that could, at least in theory, let a traveller return to an earlier moment. These loops sometimes appear in the mathematical descriptions of rotating black holes or wormholes, but even when the shapes exist on paper, the universe often hides them behind horizons, like distant rooms whose doors are sealed. A traveller might see the doorway shimmering far away, but as they approach, they find that crossing the threshold would mean passing into a place where no return is possible, or into a region so unstable that the doorway collapses the moment they touch it. This is the essence of one-way access. The door may be real, but it does not open from both sides. It might lead forward, into the unfolding future, but resist any attempt to step backward. In this sense, time protects its deeper chambers not through force, but through geometry, by shaping the corridors so that only certain directions remain navigable. Wormholes offer another illustration of this asymmetric openness. Earlier, we imagined them as tunnels formed by the folding of space-time, connecting distant points like two pages brought close together. But if one end of the wormhole sits near a region of intense gravity, time inside that mouth may slow dramatically compared to the other. By the time the two openings are brought into alignment, one may lead into a moment long past while the other opens only into the future. The traveller might step into the wormhole and emerge in a different era, but the return path may no longer point backward. It may only spill forward, like a stream that flows in one direction no matter how hard you try to follow it upstream. You can soften this picture by imagining a staircase built into the side of a hill. Climbing up is easy. You can see the steps, feel the air grow cooler as you ascend. But once you reach the top, you find that the staircase does not continue downward on the far side. You can only move forward along a ridge trail, not return the way you came. Your journey is not restricted by force, but by the shape of the land itself. The same is true for certain structures of time. They offer paths, but not necessarily the ones a traveller hopes to take. In the language of Chrononauts, these are known as temporal one-ways. They are pathways that carry you into the future with ease, but refuse to let you drift backward again. Sometimes the refusal is gentle, like a path that simply fades. Other times it appears as a sudden burst of instability, energy rising softly like heat on a summer road, shimmering until the structure dissolves. To appreciate why these one-way doors matter, consider how they protect the continuity of the timeline. If backward travel risks contradictions, the universe may simply shape itself so that such travel cannot occur. The Chrononaut might feel a pull toward the past, might see the faint hint of a passage opening, but upon approaching finds that it no longer leads where expected. The doorway has quietly redirected itself, allowing only motion that keeps the story intact. This redirection is not punitive. It is smooth, natural, and almost compassionate. The universe is not saying no with force, it is saying not here. Like a stream that divides around a fallen tree, the flow of moments adjusts so that the traveller continues, safely. This idea also reveals something touching about the Chrononauts' journey. It means that their freedom is real but not boundless. They can wander through eras, witness untold stories, and explore the future with open hands. But when they attempt to walk against the deeper currents of time, toward paradox, toward contradiction, the currents grow firm and redirect their steps. Time, in this sense, behaves like a gentle guide, leading the traveller away from paths that would cause harm. Even the imagery of hidden rooms behind horizons speaks to this gentleness. The traveller may approach the boundary where a loop should form, only to see the horizon shimmer like heat rising from sand. The shape of the pathway becomes uncertain. The door grows faint, like a dream fading on waking, and then it disappears, leaving only the steady path forward. These hidden doors also hold a certain beauty. They remind us that not all mysteries are meant to be unravelled. Some exist simply to show the depth of the world, the richness of the structure beneath our feet. The Chrononaut, seeing one of these fading doors, may feel a subtle sense of awe, not frustration, but gratitude. For even in its refusals, the universe remains graceful. As this sense of graceful limitation settles, a new understanding gently emerges. If some doorways cannot be opened, others may open naturally in the direction that poses no risk to the timeline. And in that direction, the direction of the unfolding future, time travel becomes not only possible, but beautifully safe. For all the extraordinary images that time travel conjures, spinning machines, glowing tunnels, shimmering loops of causality, there is something quietly reassuring in knowing that one form of time travel is not only possible, but already woven into the world around us. It requires no paradoxes, no contradictions, no fragile corridors hidden behind horizons. It simply asks us to move through the universe the way the universe already moves. This gentle, reliable path is known as relativistic travel, the natural stretching of time that happens when someone journeys at great speed or rests in regions of strong gravity. To feel this idea without rushing into equations, imagine two people sitting in a quiet room, listening to the ticking of the same clock. Every second passes at the same gentle pace. But now picture one of them stepping outside and boarding a long train that moves faster and faster until the world around them becomes a blur. Inside the train, everything seems normal. Their heartbeat remains steady. Their thoughts drift as they always do. But when they return to the quiet room, they discover something astonishing. The person who stayed behind has aged more. The clock on the wall has marched ahead while their own watch lags behind, like two melodies played at different tempos. This difference is not a trick. It is one of the soft truths of the universe. Time itself can stretch and fold depending on how we move through it. In the language of relativity, this stretching is often described with symbols and precise expressions, but we can understand it without writing anything complicated. Think instead of time as a long piece of fabric. When you are still, the fabric lies flat beneath you. When you begin to move quickly, especially very, very quickly, the fabric tugs and gathers around you, slowing your passage across it. You cover distance faster, but you move across time more slowly. When you return to a place of stillness, you find that the rest of the world has walked farther along the fabric than you have. Astronauts who travel into orbit experience a tiny version of this. Their clocks run just a little slower than the clocks on Earth. The difference is small, barely a whisper, yet measurable. It shows that time, rather than being rigid or universal, is sensitive to motion. The faster you move, the more gently time holds your hand, slowing your step so that you age more slowly. Now imagine taking this gentle effect and magnifying it. Picture a starship drifting through space, slowly accelerating until its speed approaches the cosmic speed limit. Something impossibly fast for us now, but imaginable for a distant future. Inside the ship, the chrononaut might gaze out the window at stars stretching into slender lines of light. Days and weeks pass, meals are cooked, conversations flow, dreams rise and fall. But outside the ship, years glide by, cities grow, generations turn, oceans warm and cool, worlds evolve under suns that the traveller barely sees glide across their view. When the chrononaut returns to Earth, they step out into a future that unfolded without them, as though time had hurried ahead while they walked within a slower, gentler flow. And the beauty of this scenario is that it carries no paradox at all. Nothing in the past can be changed, because the traveller has not stepped backward through time, only forward at a different pace. The fabric of causality remains untouched. The traveller is like someone who followed a different walkway through a garden, one that curved behind a wall and took longer to rejoin the main path. Gravity too can slow time's passing. Near a massive object, like a planet, a star, or something denser still, the fabric of space-time stretches downward, the way a sheet sags under the weight of a stone. In this deeper section of the fabric, time flows differently. A person who lingers near such a massive object ages more slowly than someone far away. The effect is subtle, but real. If one chrononaut travelled close to a dense celestial body, while another remained in a place where time flows more freely, the difference would appear the moment they met again. One might look only slightly older, while the other carries the years more visibly. These differences are not dangerous or chaotic. They are simply the universe adjusting the rhythm of time to match the shape of space. And because this adjustment always flows forward, never backward, it keeps the timeline clean, stable, and free of contradiction. There is no risk of the traveller meeting their younger self or stepping into a moment that should have been sealed. They simply peek into the future, carried there by the gentle currents of relativity. For a chrononaut, this path offers a kind of peaceful clarity. They can explore eras far ahead without worrying about unravelling the past. They can watch the slow blooming of civilizations, see how cultures transform, witness the distant future of stars. They become travellers not of paradox but of perspective, observers drifting along a different tempo of time. You can imagine one such traveller returning home. They step out of their vessel, breathing in air that smells familiar and strange all at once. The buildings are taller, the language flows differently. People move with rhythms they do not fully recognise. And yet, nothing they have done has altered the story that led to this moment. They have simply stepped into the next chapter, the way a river eventually reaches the sea. Relativistic travel becomes, in this way, a gentle invitation. It shows us that time is not a static march, but a flexible living thing, capable of slowing, stretching, and reshaping itself around our journeys. It reveals that the universe is quiet, thoughtful, and precise, offering ways to explore time without risking its delicate continuity. And as that understanding settles, a softer question emerges. If time can stretch forward without danger, what limits prevent information, messages, warnings, whispers from flowing backward? And how does the universe protect itself from the smallest details that might, if sent upstream, ripple into something far greater? These are the questions waiting just ahead, resting in the gentle mist where the past and future touch only lightly. There is a particular kind of temptation that comes with imagining time travel. Not the temptation to change great events or rewrite history, but the simpler, more personal longing to whisper a message into the past. People often imagine sending back a warning, a hint, or a small piece of information that could help someone avoid a mistake. It feels harmless, even kind. But the universe, in its quiet way, seems to resist these backward whispers. Not through punishment or strict prohibition, but through something gentler and more intricate, the natural limits of information. To sense this more softly, imagine trying to speak across a great distance on a foggy morning. Your voice travels, but the fog muffles it. Each word becomes softer, less distinct, until only fragments drift through the mist. You may still be heard, but the message changes shape. It becomes something new, something with less weight, less clarity, and less ability to alter the world around it. This is how information behaves when it brushes against the borders of time. Physics. The concept of information decay is often described with symbols and equations, but we don't need them here. Instead, picture a chalk drawing on a sidewalk. When it is fresh, bright and crisp, you can see every line. But as days pass, sunshine, footsteps, wind, its edges blur. The drawing remains recognizable, but the details fade. If you tried to convey a precise message through that chalk picture, the meaning would dissolve long before someone in the distant future could read it clearly. Now imagine flipping the situation. Instead of sending information forward, you try to send it backward. The pathway becomes delicate and unstable, like walking across thin ice. Even the slightest vibration can crack the surface. As the message moves against the flow of time, tiny disturbances, random noise, fluctuations in energy, the natural unpredictability of systems begin to cling to it. The message gathers these disturbances the way a sweater gathers static sparks, until its meaning is unrecognizable. This is why no chrononaut could simply deliver lottery numbers to a younger self, or reveal the outcome of elections, or warn someone about future disasters. The universe keeps the past coherent by allowing only fragile echoes to drift backward. Anything too precise dissolves before it can reach a meaningful point. You can experience this concept in everyday life through memory. Think of a moment from your childhood that you remember clearly. Now try to recall the exact words someone spoke to you. The precise details have faded, replaced by impressions, tones, and feelings. The memory remains intact, but the finer threads have loosened. This is how time handles information, gently, without harshness, letting only the broad strokes survive. In the world of quantum ideas, this fading becomes even more poetic. Some theorists describe a phenomenon where even the tiniest attempt to send information into the past becomes blurred by what you might think of as a fog of possibility. Many potential versions of the message emerge, some clearer, some distorted, some contradictory. But the only versions that can survive are the ones that do not disturb the flow of events. In other words, messages that would cause paradoxes simply unravel on their own, as though the universe releases its grip on them. Imagine standing in a vast, quiet hall filled with candles. Each candle represents a possible version of your message. You try to carry your words backward through the hall, but as you walk, drafts of air flicker through the space. Some candles blow out, others dim. Only the candles whose flames are least disturbed remain lit, and those are the only versions of the message that reach the past, soft, faint, and unlikely to cause any sharp turn in the timeline. This soft limitation has a calming effect. It means that a chrononaut wandering through the past cannot accidentally break history. Even if they tried to speak a dangerous secret or reveal a critical future event, the message would blur. The words might slur together. The listener might misinterpret them. A sudden noise might drown them out. The meaning might slip away before it has a chance to take root. Imagine trying to explain a modern device, say a smartphone, to someone living centuries ago. Even if they heard your words, the concept would be too strange, too distant from their understanding. They might interpret it as a metaphor, a dream, a spirit, or simply nonsense. The idea would fade, washed back into the fabric of time. The message, unable to settle, becomes harmless. Even more profound is the idea that the universe itself might add gentle noise to information moving backward in time, like wind brushing across a surface and smoothing out sharp lines. This soft noise ensures that only the vaguest impressions survive. A traveller's warning becomes a proverb, a prediction becomes a superstition, a secret becomes a fable, and in this way, information finds a new form, one that fits snugly within the timeline without changing the stones beneath it. To put it simply, you cannot break the timeline by accident. Even the attempt to do so becomes softened, blurred, and absorbed. The universe takes dangerous details and turns them into harmless whispers. This principle offers a kind of quiet peace to the Chrononaut. They may explore the past with curiosity and compassion, but they do not carry the weight of perfection. They cannot ruin the flow of events with a single word. They cannot unravel history through a casual conversation. Time itself acts as a gentle filter, allowing only messages that fit the story's rhythm to pass through. And so, as the traveller walks through earlier eras, hearing voices from long ago, feeling the air of forgotten nights, they can relax. They can be present without fear. They can speak softly without worrying that their breath will topple the structure of existence. Their words, even when sincere and urgent, will dissolve into forms the past can hold safely. And with this realization comes another. If information cannot travel clearly into the past, then perhaps guidance for chrononauts must come not from whispered warnings or strict rules, but from gentle principles, guidelines that shine like lanterns along the path, helping the traveller walk with grace. Those lanterns, those soft rules, wait just ahead. When we imagine a traveller moving through time, it is easy to picture their journey as something dramatic, dashing between eras, intervening in history, leaving ripples behind them. But in truth, the chrononaut who travels safely without disturbing the delicate weave of the timeline moves with a far softer grace. They are less like an adventurer stepping into chaos, and more like a lantern bearer wandering through a vast ancient library, careful not to knock a single book from its shelf. Over time, guided by the universe's natural rhythms, the soft self-corrections, the quiet fading of dangerous information, the one-way doors that protect the past, certain principles emerge. These principles are not strict rules written in stone. They're gentle guidelines, each one glowing softly like a symbol etched on the side of a lantern. Together they help a chrononaut walk through the past without disturbing its fragile harmony. The first of these lanterns is the rule of self-consistency. It comes from the understanding that the past is not an empty canvas waiting to be rewritten, but a story that already contains your footprints. A chrononaut stepping into the past does not enter a blank page. They enter a chapter that has always included their arrival. The universe tends to guide events toward outcomes that already fit the present. You can imagine this as walking along a forest path where the soil beneath you has already recorded your footsteps, though you have not yet made them. The path remembers you. The past too remembers your presence long before you arrive. If you attempt to do something that contradicts your own history, something subtle, the timing of a breeze, a misplaced object, a sudden distraction, will gently redirect your hand, helping the story remain whole. The second lantern is the rule of branching paths. While the past in your own timeline may be fixed, there are whispers, soft possibilities. suggesting that the universe may unfold into many branches. If a traveller takes an action that does not fit the story they came from, they may simply find themselves walking into a different room in the Great Hall of Timelines. In this view, changing the past does not break anything. It only leads you into a different doorway. The old hallway remains intact behind you. The new hallway opens ahead. This idea gives the Chrononaut a gentle sense of freedom. Not every deviation is dangerous. Some simply lead elsewhere, into timelines that welcome the new choice. Like choosing a different footpath in a wide garden, the traveller may wander into another branch without fear of destroying the one they left behind. The third lantern is the rule of temporal stability. Some moments in history are delicate, like a thin strand of glass that must not be touched. Others are sturdy, woven tightly across countless causes. A chrononaut who listens carefully can sense the difference. Minor interactions, dropping a pebble, whispering a question, brushing past a passerby, may leave no trace at all. They fade, like ripples smoothing themselves on a pond. But larger actions, ones that might disrupt a fragile moment, are met with quiet resistance from the universe. The moment shifts. People arrive too early or too late. The chrononaut finds themselves gently steered away, the way a bird riding a breeze is carried around a storm cloud rather than through it. This stability is not a cage but a comfort. It shows the traveller where they may roam freely and where they must move softly, preserving the rhythm of the story. The fourth lantern is the rule of limited information. Words, warnings, and secrets do not travel backward through time as clearly as we imagine. They blur, they fade, they become metaphors, riddles, dreams, safe forms that cannot twist the timeline into contradiction. A traveller may attempt to reveal something important, but the universe filters the message, softening its edges until it no longer threatens the narrative. A prophecy becomes a superstition. A warning becomes a story told around a fire. A set of precise instructions becomes a faint impression, too vague to steer events sharply. This rule frees the chrononaut from the fear of causing harm with a careless word. They may speak, but time will decide what meaning survives. What remains is always the version that fits. The fifth and final lantern is the rule of safe futures. While the past may hold delicate boundaries, the future opens wide like a sunlit valley. Travelling forward poses no risk to the timeline. Time stretches naturally under speed and gravity, allowing the traveller to drift into tomorrow or 10,000 tomorrows without touching the fragile threads behind them. A chrononaut may climb into a vessel, accelerate into starlit cold, and return to a world centuries older. Nothing in that journey disturbs the past. It is the gentlest form of time travel we know, the one the universe openly allows. It invites exploration without danger, curiosity without consequence. Together, these 5 lanterns illuminate the path of paradox-proof travel. They are less like strict rules and more like constellations, guiding, steady, but leaving room for wonder. A chrononaut who follows them moves through time the way one walks beneath a cathedral's vaulted ceiling, quietly, reverently, aware of the centuries resting around them. Imagine such a traveller stepping into an ancient marketplace. They watch the chatter of merchants, the laughter of children, the rustle of cloth in the warm afternoon wind. They do not fear disturbing the scene. Their steps are careful, their presence light. They understand the rhythm of the place, the resistance of certain moments, the openness of others. The lanterns they carry, self-consistency, branching paths, stability, limited information, safe futures, glow softly at their side, reminding them of the quiet promise the universe makes. Walk gently, and the story will hold you. And as this image settles, another forms just at the edge of thought, a reminder that beyond safety lies meaning, that time travel, to be responsible, must also be compassionate, and that avoiding paradoxes is not only a matter of physics, but also a matter of ethics, empathy, and care. That is where the next part of our journey gently awaits. There is a moment in every long journey when the traveller pauses, not to rest, but to reflect. After wandering through the intricate shapes of time, loops, branches, narrow corridors and wide, sunlit valleys, a chrononaut may finally begin to understand that avoiding paradoxes is not simply a matter of physics. It is also a matter of care, a matter of responsibility, a matter of gentle respect for the fragile, interconnected world they move through. Paradoxes are often described in technical terms, but for our quiet exploration tonight, we can think of them more simply. They are fractures in the story of reality. They are places where the narrative twists in on itself, threatening to lose its meaning. And just as a storyteller would protect the integrity of a tale, or a gardener would shield a delicate seedling from harm, a traveller through time must learn to move with the kind of tenderness that honours the timeline rather than challenging it. To understand this softly, imagine holding a piece of ancient pottery in your hands. The glaze is cracked, the shape slightly uneven, but it carries centuries of meaning. You can turn it gently, admire the patterns, feel the past resting beneath your fingertips. But if you press too hard, if you drop it or force it into a new form, the pottery will break. Time, too, is a vessel. It holds memories, choices, and countless lives intertwined in delicate ways. A chrononaut handling the past must do so as though holding something irreplaceable. Avoiding paradoxes is not merely about avoiding physical contradictions. It is about protecting the people who live inside the timeline, their stories, their hopes, their struggles, and even the tragedies that shape them. To alter a key event in someone's life, even with the purest intention, might erase experiences that built their character or relationships that anchored their world. Changing the past can be like tugging on a single thread and watching an entire tapestry unravel. A chrononaut who understands this begins to walk with humility, aware that their choices carry weight far beyond what they can see. Even small acts can ripple outward. A word spoken at the wrong moment, a gesture intercepted by chance, a warning whispered into the wrong ear. Each one becomes a stone dropped into a pond whose surface stretches further than the traveller can imagine. And while the universe often cushions these ripples, absorbing them into stable outcomes, there is still an ethical truth beneath that cushioning. The chrononaut must never assume the right to reshape another person's path. This ethic becomes even clearer when we consider events that are painful or tragic. It is natural to imagine stepping into the past to ease suffering, avert catastrophe, or pull someone away from a heartbreaking fate. But even here, time asks for gentleness. A tragedy prevented may spare one person, but endanger another. A disaster delayed may strike later, in a different form, with greater cost. And even when the traveller's intentions are pure, they may remove lessons, connections, or strengths that families and communities built in the aftermath. Pain is not something to wish upon anyone, but it is also part of the history that shaped the world the chrononaut comes from. This does not mean the traveller must turn away from compassion. It only means that compassion must be paired with wisdom. If the universe allows a small mercy, saving one person without unravelling the path of another, then the chrononaut may act gently within that space, but they must listen to the rhythm of time, the tension in the moment, and the subtle feeling that rises when an action carries too much weight. Ethical time travel is full of listening, restraint, and understanding. There is another side to this ethics, responsibility for oneself. A paradox does not only threaten the timeline, it threatens the traveller's place within it. A chrononaut who alters their own past too sharply might lose the experiences that made them who they are. They may erase friendships, lessons, moments of joy or sorrow that shaped their heart. In trying to save someone else, they may lose themselves, and so avoiding paradox becomes a form of self-preservation as well, a promise to honour their own story. You can imagine this responsibility as a lantern the traveller carries. Its light helps them see where their path intersects with others, where their choices ripple quietly outward, and where they must tread lightly. Every step becomes a meditation on care. Will this alter a fragile moment? Will this reshape a life that was not mine to touch? Will this create a contradiction that tears the story of time? The Chrononaut learns to walk slowly, guided by questions rather than impulses. And then there is the larger truth, the truth that no timeline belongs solely to the traveller. The past is shared by all who lived it. The present is shared by all who inhabit it. The future is shared by all who will inherit it. To treat time as something to manipulate freely would be to assume ownership over the lives of countless others, but time is not a possession, it is a community. A chrononaut who understands this feels a deep sense of belonging, but also a deep sense of humility. Avoiding paradoxes, then, is not only about preserving coherence, it is about practicing empathy. It is about respecting the autonomy of every person whose life touches the timeline. It is about recognizing that even when the traveller can act, they must first ask whether they should. And as this ethical understanding settles quietly into the chrononaut's heart, the fear of paradox dissolves. Not because paradoxes are impossible, but because the traveller walks with a gentleness that makes them unnecessary. Their journey becomes less about changing history and more about witnessing it, learning from it, and carrying its wisdom forward. And as the traveller returns to their own moment, lantern still glowing softly at their side, they begin to sense something else, a deeper truth waiting at the end of all journeys. A reminder that time, in its vastness, has a way of settling into harmony, no matter how many paths we walk. That is where our final reflection waits, gentle as a breath at dusk. There comes a moment, near the end of every long journey, when the traveller slows their steps, not from weariness, but from a desire to linger just a little longer. After wandering through the intricate corridors of time, exploring its folds, its rules, its gentle refusals and quiet allowances, a chrononaut eventually finds themselves standing at a place of stillness. A place where the past and future seem equally far away, and where the entire structure of time feels like a single, softly held breath. In this moment, something becomes clear. Time, for all its complexity, is not a fragile thing at all. It bends, it adapts, it guides. It protects itself with a grace so subtle that one might miss it entirely unless they approach with patience. And even when the traveller presses against its boundaries, testing old doors or brushing fingers against delicate threads, the universe finds a way to remain whole. To appreciate this, imagine standing at the edge of a quiet lake at dusk. The surface is glass smooth, reflecting the sky in perfect symmetry. You toss a pebble into the water, and for a moment the reflections distort. Ripples expand, rings overlap, but then, slowly and surely, the surface calms. The lake does not hold the disturbance forever. It does not allow a single ripple to break its shape. It absorbs the motion, releases it, and settles back into its reflection. Time behaves in much the same way. Even the smallest disturbances, an unexpected word, a misaligned choice, a traveller's presence in a moment where they do not belong, are smoothed out as the timeline finds its natural balance again. It straightens, not with force, but with a calm persistence, as though harmony is its default state. For a chrononaut, this realization brings a profound sense of peace. They no longer see time as a fragile maze where one wrong step shatters the walls. They see it instead as a living landscape, resilient, breathable, capable of adapting gently to every motion within it. The universe is not a brittle clockwork mechanism waiting to break. It is a vast tapestry whose threads shift to accommodate new patterns while preserving the whole. This final understanding reframes everything that came before. The paradoxes that once seemed threatening now appear more like illusions, misunderstandings born from looking at time too narrowly. The grandfather paradox, the loops, the questions about cause and effect, they dissolve when viewed from a wider perspective. Time does not trap itself in contradictions. It folds around them, reroutes them, or absorbs them into structures that make sense. Imagine a long hallway lined with doors. Some doors open into gardens where choices bloom in countless colours. Others reveal long corridors that stretch deep into the future, filled with moments yet unseen. A few appear locked, not through malice, but because they lead to rooms that cannot coexist with the rest of the house. Time, like a quiet caretaker, guides the traveller away from those doors and toward the ones that open easily. And in this guidance, something gentle appears. The sense that the universe is not resisting the traveller but walking with them. Every step through time is accompanied by a soft awareness, an unseen hand smoothing the path. When an action threatens contradiction, the hand redirects it. When information risks confusion, the hand softens it. When the traveller seeks a doorway not meant to open, the hand fades it from sight, replacing it with another path, one leading safely into the unfolding story. This hand is not a literal force. It is simply the nature of time asserting its shape. The universe protects its coherence the way a vine protects its climbing pattern, growing around obstacles, adjusting where needed, but always reaching upward. For the traveller, this means they are never truly lost, even if they stray into uncertain territory, through a wormhole that flickers at the edges, or a loop that quivers with instability. The universe guides them toward a stable outcome. It is as though each timeline has its own sense of direction, its own quiet preference for balance. And so the Chrononaut, having wandered through the fabric of time, begins to understand that paradoxes are not enemies to be feared, but teachers. They reveal the limits of our imagination, the boundaries of cause and effect, and the places where our human intuition is too simple to grasp the elegance beneath. Paradoxes whisper, "Look closer." Time is more flexible than you think, and more harmonious than you fear. In this soft realization, the Chrononaut finally returns home, not just to their own moment, but to a deeper understanding of reality. They carry with them a kind of serenity, knowing that the timeline they inhabit has always been quietly self-stabilizing, always finding a way to keep the story intact no matter how many branches or loops lie hidden beneath its surface. As they settle back into their familiar world, they look around and see it with new eyes. Every clock on the wall, every sunrise, every memory tucked into the folds of a day, they all feel like parts of a greater rhythm. A rhythm that spans eras, civilizations, stars, and quiet pockets of existence that no one has yet seen. And perhaps, in the dim light of evening, the Chrononaut lights a lantern, a simple reminder of the principles that guided them through their journey. The lantern glows softly, reflecting the 5 gentle rules they carried, and beneath its light they whisper a quiet promise: to move through time, whether forward or inward, with care. To let curiosity be tempered by respect, and to remember that every moment is part of a story larger than themselves. As we come to the end of this exploration, we step softly into the final thought, the one that lingers long after the last words fade. It is a thought as gentle as a falling leaf, as steady as the tide, and as comforting as a warm blanket drawn close on a quiet night. Wherever you wander in time, may the path settle softly beneath your feet, and may the universe, in all its quiet wisdom, always guide you home.